I'm Sophie Whitaker. And 3 months ago, I watched my computer screen fade to gray while my supervisor laughed and delivered a single sentence that would change everything. Start over from scratch. She had no idea that mouse-click would reshape our entire company, just not in the way she expected. Stay with me until the end. Because the phone call that followed that delete turned a dismissed employee into the ace card that competitors fought to claim. And this reversal will show you that sometimes the sweetest revenge is letting them destroy themselves. The fluorescent lights of Corvex Insights hummed their usual monotonous tune as I settled into my desk that Tuesday morning. Coffee still steaming in my ceramic mug that read, "World's Okayest Employee." A gag gift from my college roommate that had become oddly prophetic. The Boston skyline stretched beyond our 14th floor windows. A reminder that bigger things existed beyond these beige cubicle walls. I'd been the customer experience manager at this mid-tier market analytics firm for exactly 18 months. And in that time, I'd learned that corporate America had a peculiar way of punishing people for caring too much. My approach to client relations wasn't revolutionary. I just treated our customers like actual human beings instead of account numbers on a spreadsheet. Revolutionary? Apparently. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd stumbled into this philosophy by accident. When I first joined Corvex, the company was hemorrhaging clients faster than a leaking ship. 3 major accounts had jumped ship in the 6 months before my arrival, citing impersonal service and lack of understanding of our business needs. The previous customer experience manager had lasted exactly 14 months before burning out completely, leaving behind a legacy of automated responses and quarterly check-ins that felt more like tax audits than business partnerships. My direct supervisor, Madeline Crowhurst, head of operations, embodied everything I'd learned to distrust about corporate culture. She was the kind of person who spoke in buzzwords and measured success solely through KPIs, treating every human interaction like a problem to be solved through efficient processes. Madeline had been with Corvex for 7 years, climbing the ladder through what she called strategic optimization, and what I recognized as systematically removing any trace of personality from our client relationships. During my first week, I'd watched Madeline conduct a client call with Brennan Industries, one of our remaining major accounts. She'd opened with a scripted greeting, moved through a checklist of service deliverables, and closed with a template sign-off that could have been generated by artificial intelligence. The client, David Brennan himself, had responded with polite but noticeably cool professionalism. After hanging up, Madeline had turned to me with satisfaction. Efficiency. Sophie. That's how we maintain consistent service standards across all accounts. But I'd noticed something she'd missed. The micro-pause when David mentioned their upcoming product launch, the slight shift in his tone when discussing market positioning. These weren't just business transactions. They were people trying to build something meaningful. And they wanted partners who understood that. So I started small. When I followed up on that same Brennan Industries account the next week, I didn't just ask about their quarterly projections. I remembered that David had mentioned their product launch and asked how the preparation was going. I noticed their company newsletter mentioning an employee appreciation event and asked if our analytics had helped inform their staff expansion plans. The response was immediate and dramatic. David's tone warmed noticeably. He started volunteering information about their challenges, their long-term vision, their concerns about market positioning. What had been a 15-minute quarterly check-in became a 40-minute strategic consultation. More importantly, he mentioned 2 specific areas where our analytics could provide additional value, services we offered but had never thought to present to his company. I began applying this approach systematically. I researched each client's industry news, remembered personal details from previous conversations, and most importantly, I listened for the problems they weren't directly asking us to solve. When Martha Goldstein at Precision Marketing mentioned struggling with seasonal fluctuations, I didn't just acknowledge it, I spent my lunch break researching seasonal analytics strategies and called her back with 3 specific recommendations. The results spoke for themselves. Client retention rates began climbing. Revenue from existing accounts increased as clients expanded their service packages. New referrals started coming in, something that hadn't happened at Corvex in over 2 years. Within 6 months, our department's revenue had grown by 28%. But success, I learned, could be its own trap. Madeline never acknowledged these improvements directly. Instead, she began finding fault with my inefficient methods. She questioned why my client calls ran longer than scheduled. She criticized my practice of sending personalized follow-up emails instead of using the company templates. She made pointed comments about professional boundaries when I remembered clients' birthdays or asked about their families. "Sophie, we need to maintain consistent service standards," she'd say during our weekly one-on-ones. "Your approach isn't scalable. What happens when we need to train other team members? We can't base our entire strategy on your personal relationships." I tried explaining that the relationships weren't personal. They were professional relationships built on understanding and genuine interest in client success. But Madeline saw only inefficiency where I saw investment. Only deviation from protocol where I saw adaptation to client needs. The tension reached a breaking point during our Q3 performance review. The executive team had specifically praised our department's turnaround. CEO Robert Hartley had mentioned our improved client satisfaction scores during the all-hands meeting. CFO Amanda Torres had highlighted our revenue growth as a bright spot in an otherwise challenging quarter. But instead of celebrating this success, Madeline seemed increasingly frustrated. During my performance review, she delivered what should have been positive feedback with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "Your client retention numbers are acceptable," she said, barely looking up from her notes. "Revenue growth is within target ranges. However, I have concerns about your methodology sustainability." "Sustainability?" I'd asked, genuinely confused. "Your approach relies too heavily on individual relationships. It's not process-driven enough. We need systems that can operate regardless of personnel changes." I realized then that my success wasn't just threatening her management philosophy, it was threatening her relevance. If clients could be retained and grown through genuine relationship building rather than automated systems, what value did her process optimization expertise provide? The writing on the wall became impossible to ignore when Madeline announced a new initiative: operational transparency. She explained that to better understand and systematize our client relationship strategies, she needed comprehensive documentation of all client interactions, relationship histories, and strategic approaches. "We're going to create a complete playbook," she announced during our department meeting. "Every successful client interaction will be documented, analyzed, and transformed into replicable processes." The request itself wasn't unreasonable. Documentation is important for any business function. But the way Madeline presented it, as if our client relationships were specimens to be dissected and replicated, made my stomach turn. Still, I complied. I spent the next 3 weeks compiling everything, detailed interaction histories for each of our 47 active accounts, strategic notes on individual client preferences and business challenges, templates for the personalized communications that had driven our success, and comprehensive analyses of what had worked and why. The document grew into a 127-page strategic playbook that represented not just 12 months of work, but a fundamental philosophy about how business relationships should function. I'd included case studies showing how personal attention had saved specific accounts, analyses of client communication preferences, and frameworks for identifying expansion opportunities through genuine partnership rather than aggressive sales tactics. I was proud of the work. It represented everything I'd learned about turning failing client relationships into thriving partnerships. More importantly, it proved that the human-first approach wasn't just feel-good fluff. It was a legitimate business strategy that delivered measurable results. The department meeting where I presented this work should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the moment everything changed. Madeline had scheduled the presentation for 2 p.m. on a Thursday, inviting not just our immediate team, but representatives from sales, marketing, and business development. Nearly 30 people crowded into Conference Room B, laptops open, notebooks ready. I'd prepared a presentation highlighting key findings from the playbook, focusing on the strategic principles that had driven our success. I was genuinely excited to share insights that could help the entire company improve client relationships. But from the moment I began speaking, I could tell something was wrong. Madeline sat at the far end of the table, her expression unreadable. She didn't ask questions during my presentation. She didn't offer the supportive comments that managers typically provide when their team members present to larger groups. Instead, she waited until I finished, then stood up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Sophie. This is exactly what I hoped we'd accomplish with this exercise." She walked to the front of the room and pulled up her own presentation on the screen. The title slide read, "Efficiency versus Effectiveness, a case study in resource allocation." "What Sophie has created here," Madeline began, gesturing toward my printed playbook, "is a perfect example of what happens when we prioritize individual relationships over systematic processes. 127 pages of documentation for what should be standardized procedures." My heart began to race as I realized what was happening. The level of detail here represents hundreds of hours of work that could have been spent on actual client service. Instead, we have personal notes about clients' family members, detailed records of casual conversations, and strategic recommendations based on subjective impressions rather than data-driven insights. She clicked to her next slide, which showed a comparison chart between my client interaction times and industry standards. My numbers were higher, something I'd always seen as a positive indicator of relationship depth. But Madeline presented them as evidence of inefficiency. While Sophie's intentions are admirable, this approach represents exactly the kind of resource misallocation that prevents us from scaling our operations. We cannot build a sustainable business model on one person's ability to remember client birthdays and family updates. The room had gone completely silent. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes shifting between Madeline and me, watching a professional execution unfold in real time. "Which brings us to our next step," Madeline continued, her voice taking on a tone of forced enthusiasm. "We're going to start fresh. New processes, standardized approaches, scalable systems." She clicked to her final slide, which showed a timeline for operational reset. Then she turned to face me directly. "Sophie, I'm going to need you to delete this entire playbook and start rebuilding our client relationship protocols from scratch. We need systems that can be implemented by anyone, not strategies that depend on individual personalities." The words hit me like a physical blow. Delete the playbook, start from scratch. 12 months of work, dozens of strategic insights, proof that relationship-based approaches actually worked, all of it dismissed as inefficient resource allocation. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "The playbook needs to be deleted," Madeline repeated matter-of-factly. "We're starting over with a clean slate, new approach, new documentation, new systems." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "You want me to delete 12 months of strategic work because it's too detailed?" "I want you to delete 12 months of inefficient documentation so we can build something scalable." The room remained silent. I could see some of my colleagues looking uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. In corporate America, challenging your supervisor's decisions in front of a large group was career suicide. "Madeline, this work has directly resulted in a 35% increase in our department's revenue. These aren't just random notes. They're strategic insights that have proven business value." "The revenue increase is acceptable," she replied. "But the methods are unsustainable. We need to transition to approaches that don't require your specific skill set." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Don't require your specific skill set. In other words, we want the results you've achieved, but we don't want to acknowledge that your approach is what created those results. "I understand you might be attached to this work," Madeline continued, "but sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the greater good of the organization. Please delete the file and clear your project folders. We'll start fresh next week." I looked around the room one more time, hoping someone would speak up, would point out the absurdity of destroying proven success in favor of theoretical efficiency. But I saw only averted gazes and uncomfortable silence. My laptop sat open in front of me, the playbook file visible on the screen. 12 months of work. Proof that treating clients like human beings instead of account numbers actually worked. evidence that relationship-based approaches could be systematized without losing their essential humanity. Delete it, Madeline said again, more firmly this time. We're all waiting. I could feel the weight of 30 people watching me, waiting to see if I would comply with this public humiliation. My cursor hovered over the delete button. And then, just as I was about to give in, my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the company name made my heart skip. Halden Consulting. Halden was our primary competitor in the Boston market, a firm that had been steadily growing while companies like Corvex struggled to maintain their client base. They were known for their innovative approaches to client relationships and their ability to attract top talent from established firms. I looked up at Madeline, who was still waiting for me to delete the file. Then I looked at my phone, still buzzing insistently. I need to take this, I said, standing up. Sophie, we're in the middle of a meeting. Madeline replied, her voice sharp with irritation. It's a client call, I lied, walking toward the door. I'll be right back. I stepped into the hallway and answered the phone. Sophie Whitaker, this is James Harrison, Managing Director at Halden Consulting. Do you have a moment to talk? My heart was pounding. How did you get this number? We've been following your work at Corvex. Your reputation in the industry is exceptional. We'd like to discuss a potential opportunity. I glanced back toward the conference room, where I could see Madeline still standing at the front, probably explaining to everyone why my approach to client relationships was fundamentally flawed. What kind of opportunity? We're expanding our client relationship division and looking for someone to lead the initiative, someone who understands that business success depends on genuine partnerships, not just efficient processes. The irony was overwhelming. While my own company was forcing me to delete evidence of my success, our competitor was calling to offer me a position based on that same success. I'm not sure this is the right time. Sophie, we know what's happening at Corvex. We know they're not appreciating your contributions. We're prepared to offer you a position that will let you build client relationships the way you know they should be built. What do you mean, you know what's happening? The industry is smaller than you think. Word travels fast when someone is consistently delivering results while their management is systematically undermining their methods. We've been watching your client retention numbers, your revenue growth, your approach to relationship building. We want to offer you the chance to do that work without interference. I closed my eyes, trying to process the implications. What exactly are you offering? Team leadership position, salary increase of 60%, full autonomy over client relationship strategies, and performance bonuses tied to client satisfaction and retention metrics. Plus, if you can bring any existing relationships with you, we offer partnership percentages on retained accounts. 60% salary increase, full autonomy, performance bonuses, partnership percentages, everything Corvex was denying me, Halden was offering freely. I'm going to need time to think about this. I said, Of course. But Sophie, don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait indefinitely. Can we schedule a formal meeting for tomorrow? Tomorrow is Friday. I could meet after work. Perfect. I'll send you the details. And Sophie, don't delete anything. Your strategic insights are exactly what we need. The call ended, leaving me standing in the hallway with my phone in my hand and my mind racing. Through the conference room window, I could see Madeline still presenting, probably explaining why my methods were unsustainable and inefficient. But Halden Consulting, our primary competitor, had just offered me a 60% salary increase specifically because of those same methods. I walked back into the conference room, where Madeline immediately turned to me with visible annoyance. Sophie, we're waiting for you to delete the file so we can move forward. I sat down at my laptop, looking at the playbook document that represented 12 months of strategic work. Around me, 30 colleagues waited to see if I would comply with this public humiliation. Instead, I closed the laptop. I'm not deleting it, I said quietly. The room went completely silent. Madeline's expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching anger. Excuse me? I said I'm not deleting it. This document represents proven strategies that have directly resulted in significant revenue growth. Deleting it would be professionally irresponsible. Sophie, this isn't a negotiation. I'm instructing you to delete the file, and I'm declining to follow that instruction. The tension in the room was palpable. In 7 years of corporate employment, I'd never directly refused a supervisor's directive in front of a large group. But something about that phone call, about knowing that our competitor valued my work enough to offer me a leadership position, had fundamentally shifted my perspective. If you're not willing to follow basic directives, perhaps we need to discuss your future with this company, Madeline said, her voice cold. Perhaps we do, I replied, standing up. But that discussion should happen privately, not in front of 30 people who are just trying to do their jobs. I gathered my laptop and notebook, then looked around the room one more time. Some of my colleagues were staring at their hands, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Others were watching with barely concealed interest, probably wondering if I'd finally snapped under the pressure. I'll be at my desk when you're ready to have a productive conversation about client relationship strategies, I said to Madeline. But I won't be deleting 12 months of successful work to satisfy someone's need to feel relevant. The last part was cruel, and I knew it. But watching Madeline try to destroy my work in front of my colleagues had been cruel too. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. I left the conference room and walked straight to my desk, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. I had just publicly challenged my supervisor's authority, refused a direct order, and essentially called her irrelevant in front of 30 people. In corporate terms, I had just committed professional suicide, but I also had a meeting with Halden Consulting scheduled for tomorrow evening. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a strange state of suspended animation. Madeline didn't come to my desk to continue our conversation. My colleagues gave me a wide berth, probably unsure whether to treat me as a hero or a cautionary tale. I answered emails, returned client calls, and tried to process what had just happened. Around 4 p.m., I received an email from HR requesting a meeting first thing Monday morning. The subject line read, "Performance discussion, immediate attention required." I wasn't surprised. Openly defying your supervisor's instructions was grounds for immediate termination at most companies. The fact that they were waiting until Monday probably meant they were figuring out the legal implications of firing someone whose work had directly contributed to significant revenue growth. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the Halden Consulting offer. 60% salary increase, full autonomy over client relationship strategies, performance bonuses tied to actual results rather than process compliance. It wasn't just a job offer, it was validation that my approach to client relationships had real value. That treating customers like human beings wasn't just feel-good philosophy, but legitimate business strategy. But accepting the offer would mean admitting that my time at Corvex was over. It would mean acknowledging that some corporate cultures were so toxic, so focused on process over results, that you couldn't change them from within. I thought about the clients I'd worked with over the past 18 months. David Brennan, who had become genuinely enthusiastic about our partnership because someone finally understood his business challenges. Martha Goldstein, who had expanded her service package because she trusted our recommendations. The dozens of other business owners and managers who had responded positively to being treated as partners rather than account numbers. Those relationships weren't just professional achievements, they were proof that business could be conducted with integrity, with genuine care for client success, with recognition that behind every company were real people trying to build something meaningful. Corvex didn't deserve those relationships. More importantly, Madeline didn't deserve the success that had come from those relationships. I made my decision. Friday morning, I arrived at the office early and spent 2 hours preparing for my meeting with Halden Consulting. I compiled a portfolio of my work at Corvex, client retention statistics, revenue growth data, case studies of successful relationship-building initiatives. Everything that proved my approach worked. Then I did something I'd never done before. I created a comprehensive list of every client contact, their preferred communication methods, their key business challenges, and their reasons for choosing Corvex over competitors. Not to take with me, that would be unethical and probably illegal, but to understand exactly what value I was bringing to potential relationships. The Halden Consulting meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. at their downtown offices. I'd told Madeline I had a personal appointment and would be leaving early, something that under normal circumstances would have required advance approval. But given our current situation, I doubted she'd make an issue of it. I was wrong. At 4:30 p.m., just as I was packing up my laptop, Madeline appeared at my desk with a folder in her hand. "Sophie, we need to talk." "I thought we were meeting with HR on Monday." "This can't wait until Monday. Conference room A, now." I followed her to the small conference room, wondering if she was planning to fire me before I could quit. The folder she carried looked official, probably documentation of my insubordination yesterday. "Sit down," she said, closing the door behind us. I remained standing. "What's this about?" "I know about Halden Consulting." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. "What about Halden Consulting?" "I know they called you yesterday. I know you're meeting with them tonight." "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've been in this industry for 15 years, Sophie. I have relationships with people at every major firm in Boston. When someone starts poaching talent, word gets around quickly." She opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is a non-compete agreement. You signed it when you started working here." I had signed a non-compete agreement, but I'd never paid much attention to the specific terms. Most companies required them as standard practice, and they were rarely enforced unless you were stealing trade secrets or clients. The agreement specifically prohibits you from working for direct competitors for a period of 1 year after leaving Corvex. It also prohibits you from soliciting our clients or using proprietary information to benefit competing firms. I haven't solicited any clients. Not yet. But accepting a position at Halden Consulting would put you in direct violation of your contractual obligations to this company. I finally sat down, trying to process the implications. "Are you threatening to enforce the non-compete?" "I'm explaining the legal realities of your situation. If you accept their offer, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action to protect our business interests." "Our business interests? Madeline, you tried to force me to delete 12 months of successful work because you thought it was inefficient. How exactly does that protect our business interests? Your methods are unsustainable. We need scalable processes, not individual relationships that depend on one person's skill set. My skill set has generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue for this company. My methods have improved client retention rates across our entire portfolio. My approach has directly contributed to our department's success. Success that belongs to Corvex, not to you personally." The words hung in the air between us. Success that belongs to Corvex, not to you personally. In other words, I had created value for the company, but I had no right to benefit from that value if it threatened their preferred way of doing business. "So what are you proposing?" I asked. "I'm proposing that you forget about Halden Consulting and focus on implementing the process improvements we discussed yesterday. Delete the inefficient documentation, embrace systematic approaches, and help us build something that can scale beyond your individual contributions." "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll be terminated for insubordination, and we'll enforce the non-compete agreement to prevent you from working for any competing firm in Boston." I stared at her, trying to understand the logic. Fire me for insubordination, then prevent me from working anywhere else in my field. Destroy my work, then legally prohibit me from applying that work elsewhere. "You're essentially holding me hostage," I said. "I'm protecting the company's interests. Your choice is simple. Embrace our systematic approach and continue building your career at Corvex, or face the legal consequences of violating your contractual obligations." I looked at the non-compete agreement, scanning the specific language. The terms were broader than I'd remembered, not just preventing me from working for competitors, but from engaging in any activity that could be construed as competitive with Corvex's business model. "I need to think about this," I said. "You have until Monday morning. If you don't show up ready to implement the changes we discussed, we'll assume you've chosen the legal route." She stood up, leaving the non-compete agreement on the table. "Sophie, I hope you'll make the right decision. You have potential. But you need to learn that individual success means nothing if it doesn't align with organizational objectives." After she left, I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the legal document that suddenly seemed to control my entire future. The meeting with Halden Consulting was in an hour and a half, but now I wasn't sure what to tell them. I drove to their offices in a state of mental fog, trying to figure out how to explain that I might be legally prohibited from accepting their offer. The Halden Consulting building was everything Corvex wasn't: modern, dynamic, with an energy that suggested people actually enjoyed working there. James Harrison met me in the lobby. A tall man in his mid-40s with the kind of genuine smile that had become rare in corporate America. He led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. "Sophie, thank you for coming. I know this is an unusual situation." "It's more unusual than you realize," I said, then explained about the non-compete agreement and Madeline's threats. James listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as I described the legal constraints. "Non-compete agreements are tricky," he said finally, "but they're not insurmountable. The question is whether their terms are reasonable and whether they're being enforced in good faith." "What do you mean?" "Forcing an employee to delete proven successful work, then threatening legal action if they try to apply that work elsewhere, could be construed as an unreasonable restraint of trade, especially if the work in question represents general industry knowledge rather than proprietary company secrets." He leaned forward, his tone becoming more direct. "Sophie, we've been watching your work for months. Your approach to client relationships isn't some secret formula. It's just good business practice applied consistently. The fact that Corvex doesn't recognize its value says more about their management philosophy than about your methods. When praised deep, but they could still make my life miserable with legal action. They could try. But we have excellent legal counsel, and we've dealt with similar situations before. The question is whether you're willing to take the risk." I thought about Madeline's ultimatum: embrace their systematic approach or face legal consequences. Except that my success belonged to the company, not to me personally. "What exactly would the position involve?" I asked. "You'd be director of client partnerships, reporting directly to me. Your job would be to build and lead a team that applies relationship-based approaches to client retention and growth, full autonomy over strategies and methods, with success measured by actual results rather than process compliance. And the compensation? Base salary of $120,000, performance bonuses tied to client satisfaction and retention metrics, and partnership percentages on any accounts that choose to work with us because of your relationships. We estimate total compensation could reach $180,000 in the first year." I was currently making $75,000 at Corvex, with no performance bonuses and no recognition that my work had direct value. The Halden offer represented more than just a salary increase. It was acknowledgement that relationship-based approaches had legitimate business value. "When would you need an answer?" "Honestly, as soon as possible. We're ready to move forward immediately. We could have an offer letter ready by Monday morning." "And the non-compete issue?" "We'll handle that. If Corvex wants to make this a legal fight, we're prepared to defend your right to use general industry knowledge and best practices. The key is proving that your methods aren't proprietary secrets. They're just good business sense applied consistently." That evening, I sat in my apartment with two competing futures laid out before me. Accept Madeline's ultimatum, delete my work, embrace systematic approaches, and continue building someone else's vision of client relationships. Or accept James Harrison's offer. Build a team around relationship-based approaches, with full autonomy and compensation tied to actual results. The choice should have been simple, but the threat of legal action made everything complicated. I spent the weekend researching non-compete agreements, reading about similar cases, trying to understand the legal landscape. What I found was encouraging. Courts generally didn't enforce non-compete agreements that were overly broad or that prevented employees from using general industry knowledge. More importantly, I found several cases where companies had lost legal battles after trying to prevent employees from applying widely used business practices at competing firms. The key was proving that the methods in question weren't proprietary secrets but general industry knowledge. My relationship-building approaches weren't secret formulas. They were just applications of basic principles that any business school would teach. Remember client preferences, follow up consistently, listen for unstated needs. Treat customers like partners rather than account numbers. The fact that Corvex didn't systematically apply these principles didn't make them proprietary secrets. Monday morning arrived with the weight of a life-changing decision. I'd prepared 2 scenarios: acceptance of Madeline's terms or resignation with acceptance of the Halden offer. I arrived at the office 30 minutes early, before most of my colleagues. I wanted time to think through the implications. One more time. At 9 a.m. sharp, I knocked on Madeline's office door. "Come in, Sophie. I trust you've made your decision." I sat down across from her desk, looking at the woman who had spent 18 months systematically undermining my work while benefiting from its results. "I have made my decision," I said. "I'm resigning from Corvex, effective immediately." Her expression didn't change. "I see. And Halden Consulting?" "I've accepted their offer." "Then you understand that we'll be forced to pursue legal action to protect our business interests." "I understand that you'll try, but I also understand that my methods aren't proprietary secrets. They're just good business practices applied consistently. Any legal challenge will have to prove that basic relationship-building principles belong exclusively to Corvex. Your client relationships belong to this company, Sophie. You can't just take them with you." "I'm not taking anything with me. I'm accepting a position that will allow me to apply general industry knowledge without interference from people who don't understand its value." I stood up, pulling an envelope from my briefcase. "This is my formal resignation letter. I've also prepared a detailed transition document for whoever takes over my accounts." "That won't be necessary. We'll handle the transition internally." "I'm sure you will. But I won't be responsible for the consequences when clients realize their dedicated relationship manager has been replaced by systematic processes." The words were harsh, but they were also honest. I'd spent 18 months building genuine partnerships with our clients. They would notice when those relationships were replaced by templated communications and scripted interactions. "Sophie, you're making a mistake. Your individual success means nothing if it can't be systematized and scaled. You're choosing personal ego over organizational effectiveness. I'm choosing results over process. There's a difference." I left her office and walked to my desk, where I found my colleagues pretending not to watch while clearly fascinated by the drama. I packed my personal belongings quickly, then sent a brief email to my client contacts letting them know I was leaving the company and that someone else would be taking over their accounts. I didn't mention where I was going or suggest they follow me. That would have been unethical and probably illegal. But I also didn't pretend that my departure wouldn't impact their service experience. By 10 a.m., I was walking out of the Corvex offices for the last time, carrying a box of personal items and a sense of liberation I hadn't expected. The legal threats still hung over me, but I'd made my choice. I was betting that my relationship-based approaches had legitimate business value, that treating clients like human beings wasn't a proprietary secret, and that success should be measured by results rather than process compliance. I started at Halden Consulting the following Monday, with an office overlooking Boston Harbor and a team of 3 junior associates who were eager to learn relationship-based approaches to client management. The first month was a whirlwind of onboarding, team building, and strategic planning. James Harrison had been completely honest about the autonomy. I had full authority to structure client relationships however I thought best, with success measured by satisfaction and retention metrics rather than process compliance. More importantly, I had colleagues who understood that business relationships required genuine human connection, not just efficient transactions. The legal threat from Corvex materialized in the form of a cease and desist letter delivered to Halden's offices during my 3rd week. The letter claimed that I was violating my non-compete agreement by working for a direct competitor and threatened legal action if I didn't resign immediately. Halden's legal counsel responded with a detailed analysis of why the non-compete agreement was likely unenforceable, focusing on the overly broad language and the fact that relationship-building principles weren't proprietary secrets. More importantly, they pointed out that Corvex would have to prove specific harm to their business interests, which would be difficult if I wasn't actually soliciting their clients or using proprietary information. The legal posturing continued for several weeks, with lawyers exchanging increasingly stern letters. But as our counsel had predicted, Corvex's position was weak. They couldn't prove that basic relationship-building principles were proprietary secrets, and they couldn't demonstrate specific harm beyond general competitive concerns. Meanwhile, I was building something remarkable at Halden. My team grew from 3 to 7 people within 2 months, all focused on relationship-based client management. We implemented systematic approaches to personal connection, client preference databases, strategic follow-up schedules, comprehensive business understanding frameworks. But we did it in service of genuine relationships rather than process compliance. The results were immediate and dramatic. Client satisfaction scores improved across all our accounts. Retention rates climbed steadily. Most importantly, clients began referring new business at rates Halden had never seen before. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. 3 months after I left Corvex, I received a call from David Brennan, the client whose account had been one of my first successes at my previous company. "Sophie, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I got your new contact information from your LinkedIn profile." "David, of course I don't mind. How are things going with your product launch?" "That's actually why I'm calling. We've been having some challenges with our analytics support since you left Corvex. The new person they assigned to our account is professional enough, but it's like starting over from scratch. No understanding of our business context, no awareness of our strategic priorities. Everything feels transactional." My heart sank. "I'm sorry to hear that. I know it's an adjustment period." "It's more than an adjustment period, Sophie. We're seriously considering switching providers. The relationship we had with you was a major factor in our decision to stay with Corvex, and now that's gone." I chose my words carefully. "David, I can't advise you about your relationship with Corvex. That would be inappropriate given my current position." "I understand. But I want you to know that several of us have been talking, companies that worked with you specifically. We're all having similar experiences. It's like they replaced a partnership approach with a service delivery model." "What do you mean?" "I mean they're fulfilling the contract requirements, but they're not helping us think strategically about our business. You used to call with insights that weren't directly related to our service agreement. You understood our industry challenges and made connections we hadn't thought of. Now it's just quarterly reports and invoice processing." After the call ended, I sat in my office overlooking Boston Harbor, processing what David had told me. It wasn't surprising that client relationships would suffer when a partnership approach was replaced by systematic processes, but hearing it directly from a client made the reality more stark. Over the following weeks, I received similar calls from other former Corvex clients. Not solicitations. They were reaching out to me because they missed the relationship-based approach that had made their analytics partnership valuable beyond just the data delivery. Martha Goldstein called to tell me that precision marketing was struggling with their seasonal fluctuation challenges because their new account manager didn't understand the strategic context behind their analytics needs. Robert Chen at Meridian Industries mentioned that they were paying for the same services they'd always received. But without the strategic consultation that had made those services valuable, each conversation followed a similar pattern. Professional competence from their new Corvex representatives, but no understanding of business context. No proactive strategic thinking, no sense of genuine partnership. I documented these conversations carefully, not because I planned to use them for competitive purposes, but because they represented validation of everything I'd tried to explain to Madeline. Systematic processes could deliver services efficiently, but they couldn't replace the strategic value that came from genuine business relationships. The turning point came during my 4th month at Halden. I was in James Harrison's office for our weekly strategy meeting when his assistant knocked on the door. "James, I have David Brennan from Brennan Industries on the line. He's asking to speak with Sophie directly." James raised an eyebrow. "David Brennan? Isn't he a Corvex client?" "He was," I said, "but I think that might be changing." James gestured for me to take the call at his desk while he stepped out of the office. "David, what can I do for you?" "Sophie, I'm calling to let you know that we've made a decision. We're terminating our contract with Corvex, and we'd like to discuss bringing our analytics business to Halden. David, I appreciate the call, but I need to be very careful about how we handle this. I can't be involved in soliciting business from my former employer. You're not soliciting anything, Sophie. We're making this decision based on 6 months of declining service quality since you left. The new relationship isn't working, and we need analytics support that understands our business strategically. Have you discussed your concerns with Corvex directly? Multiple times. They keep telling us that their systematic approach is more efficient and scalable. But we don't need efficient. We need effective. We need strategic thinking, not just data delivery. I thought carefully about how to respond. David, if you're serious about considering Halden, you should speak with James Harrison directly. I can't be involved in those conversations given my history with Corvex. I understand. But Sophie, I want you to know that this decision isn't about following you personally. It's about finding analytics support that treats us as strategic partners rather than account numbers. The call ended, and I immediately briefed James on the conversation. He listened thoughtfully, then smiled. This is exactly what we hoped would happen, he said. Not that we wanted to poach Corvex clients, but that relationship-based approaches would demonstrate their value in the marketplace. What do you mean? Sophie, we hired you because we believed that genuine client relationships would drive business growth. This is proof that we were right. Clients will pay for strategic partnerships, not just service delivery. Within a week, James had scheduled a meeting with David Brennan to discuss Brennan Industries' analytics needs. I wasn't involved in the conversations, but I knew that David's decision to leave Corvex wasn't about following me personally. It was about finding a provider who understood the strategic value of genuine business relationships. The Brennan Industries situation opened floodgates I hadn't expected. Word spread quickly through Boston's business community that Halden Consulting was attracting clients who were frustrated with process-driven approaches to business relationships. We weren't actively soliciting Corvex clients, but we were suddenly receiving inquiries from companies that had been disappointed by systematic approaches to what should have been strategic partnerships. Martha Goldstein called James Harrison directly to discuss Precision Marketing's analytics needs. Robert Chen scheduled a meeting to explore whether Halden could provide the strategic consultation that Meridian Industries was missing from their current provider. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Professional competence from their current providers, but no strategic thinking, no business context understanding, no sense of genuine partnership. I stayed carefully removed from these discussions, focusing instead on building our internal capabilities to serve relationship-focused clients effectively. But I couldn't help noticing that the clients who were switching to Halden shared one common characteristic. They had all experienced what happens when partnership approaches are replaced by systematic processes. The legal threats from Corvex escalated as their client defections became more noticeable. They accused me of violating my non-compete agreement by indirectly soliciting their clients through my reputation in the industry. But Halden's legal counsel had anticipated this argument. They pointed out that clients choosing to switch providers based on service quality concerns wasn't the same as employee solicitation. More importantly, they argued that preventing clients from choosing their preferred service providers would constitute an unreasonable restraint of trade. The legal battle continued for months, with both sides filing motions and counter-motions. But the fundamental issue remained. Corvex couldn't prove that basic relationship-building principles were proprietary secrets. And they couldn't prevent clients from choosing providers based on service quality preferences. Meanwhile, the business results spoke for themselves. Within 6 months of leaving Corvex, I had built a team of 12 people at Halden, all focused on relationship-based client management. Our client satisfaction scores were consistently above 95%. Our retention rates exceeded industry standards by significant margins. Most importantly, we were generating new business through referrals at rates that made traditional sales approaches seem obsolete. The approach I'd tried to implement at Corvex, treating clients as strategic partners rather than account numbers, had become the foundation of a rapidly growing business division at Halden. But the real validation came from an unexpected source: Corvex's own performance metrics. Industry publications began reporting on the analytics sector's changing landscape. Corvex's client retention rates had dropped significantly in the months following my departure. Their revenue growth had stagnated. Most telling, their client satisfaction scores had fallen below industry averages for the first time in their company's history. The systematic processes that Madeline had championed as more efficient and scalable were proving to be less effective at actually retaining clients and generating business growth. James Harrison showed me the industry reports during one of our strategy meetings. "Sophie, look at this," he said, pointing to a chart showing client retention rates across Boston analytics firms. Corvex has dropped from the top quartile to the bottom half in less than a year. "That's unfortunate," I said, meaning it. I didn't want to see Corvex fail. I just wanted validation that relationship-based approaches had legitimate business value. "It's more than unfortunate. It's proof that your approach works. Systematic processes might be more efficient in the short term, but they can't replace the strategic value that comes from genuine business relationships." "What do you mean?" "I mean that clients will tolerate impersonal service temporarily, but they won't stay loyal to providers who treat them like account numbers. Eventually, they'll find partners who understand that business relationships require genuine human connection." The industry reports confirmed what David Brennan and other former Corvex clients had told me directly. Systematic approaches could deliver services efficiently, but they couldn't provide the strategic value that made those services worth paying for long-term. As my first year at Halden drew to a close, I reflected on everything that had happened since that confrontation in Conference Room B. Madeline had forced me to choose between her vision of systematic efficiency and my belief that business relationships required genuine human connection. The market had rendered its verdict. Clients would pay premium prices for strategic partnerships, but they would eventually abandon providers who treated them like account numbers, regardless of how efficiently those services were delivered. The legal battle with Corvex finally ended during my 11th month at Halden. Their lawyers acknowledged that they couldn't prove their case and agreed to drop all claims in exchange for a settlement that amounted to little more than legal fee coverage. But the real resolution had already happened in the marketplace. Corvex's systematic approaches had proven to be less effective at retaining clients and generating business growth than the relationship-based methods they had rejected. I was sitting in my office on a Friday afternoon, reviewing quarterly performance metrics for our team, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Sophie, I have Madeline Crowhurst from Corvex on the line. She's asking to speak with you directly." I hadn't spoken with Madeline since the day I resigned. The legal battle had been handled entirely through attorneys. I couldn't imagine what she wanted to discuss now. "Tell her I'll call her back in 15 minutes, I said, needing time to think about how to handle whatever conversation she had in mind. When I returned the call, Madeline's voice was different, less authoritative, more uncertain. "Sophie, thank you for calling me back. I know this is unusual, but I wanted to reach out directly. What can I do for you, Madeline?" "I wanted to discuss the possibility of you returning to Corvex. We've been experiencing some challenges with client retention, and I think your approach might be more valuable than I initially realized." I sat in silence for a moment, processing what she had just said. After forcing me to choose between systematic efficiency and relationship-based approaches, after threatening legal action when I chose the latter, she was now asking me to return. "I'm not sure I understand," I said finally. "Our client satisfaction scores have been declining since you left. Several major accounts have switched to competitors, and the feedback we're receiving suggests that our systematic approaches aren't meeting their expectations for strategic partnership." "What kind of feedback?" "Comments about impersonal service, lack of business context understanding, no proactive strategic thinking, the same issues you tried to address when you were here." I chose my words carefully. "Madeline, those weren't just issues I tried to address. They were central to the approach I was implementing successfully before being forced to abandon it. I understand that now, which is why I'm calling. We'd like to offer you a position as Director of Client Relationships, reporting directly to me, with full authority to implement relationship-based approaches across all our accounts. And compensation? We're prepared to offer a $140,000 base salary, plus performance bonuses tied to client satisfaction and retention metrics. The offer was substantial, more than I'd been making at Corvex when I left, though still less than my current total compensation at Halden. But the real consideration wasn't financial. Madeline, I appreciate the offer, but I need to understand something. A year ago, you forced me to choose between systematic efficiency and relationship-based approaches. You threatened legal action when I chose the latter. Now you're offering me a position specifically to implement the approaches you rejected. What's changed? The market has changed, Sophie. Client expectations have evolved. What worked 5 years ago isn't working now. The market hasn't changed. Madeline, client expectations haven't evolved. They've always wanted strategic partnerships rather than impersonal service delivery. The difference is that now you're experiencing the consequences of ignoring those expectations. So you're not interested in returning? I'm interested in understanding why you think the same approaches that were inefficient and unsustainable a year ago would suddenly be valuable now. Because they work. Sophie, your methods work. Our systematic approaches don't. Then why did you force me to abandon them? Because I was wrong. I prioritized process efficiency over relationship effectiveness. I thought systematic approaches were more scalable, but I didn't consider that they might be less valuable to clients. The admission was more honest than I'd expected. But it also confirmed everything I'd tried to explain during my time at Corvex. Systematic processes could deliver services efficiently, but they couldn't replace the strategic value that came from genuine business relationships. Madeline, I appreciate your honesty, but I'm not interested in returning to Corvex. Can I ask why? Because you had the opportunity to support relationship-based approaches when they were generating measurable results. Instead, you chose to prioritize process compliance over business effectiveness. I'm not confident that the underlying cultural issues have changed. What if I could guarantee that they had changed? How could you guarantee that? By giving you complete authority over client relationship strategies, no interference, no process requirements, no systematic mandates, just results-based performance metrics. The same authority you're giving me now at Halden, except without the team I've built, the clients who trust our approach, and the organizational culture that supports relationship-based methods. Sophie, we're prepared to make this a very attractive offer. $160,000 base salary, 15% performance bonuses, full autonomy over client relationships. It's not about the money, Madeline. It's about working somewhere that values strategic thinking over process compliance. We value strategic thinking now. You value it now because systematic approaches have failed to deliver the results you expected, but you didn't value it when it was generating measurable success. That's not a cultural change, that's a business desperation. The conversation ended without resolution. Madeline said she understood my position but hoped I would reconsider. I said I appreciated her honesty but was committed to my current role. After hanging up, I sat in my office overlooking Boston Harbor, thinking about how dramatically the situation had changed. A year ago, I had been fighting to prove that relationship-based approaches had business value. Now, my former employer was offering me substantial compensation to implement those same approaches. The market had rendered its verdict. Clients would pay premium prices for strategic partnerships, but they would abandon providers who treated them like account numbers. But the real validation wasn't Madeline's job offer. It was the business we had built at Halden, the team of 15 people who understood that treating clients as strategic partners wasn't just feel-good philosophy, but legitimate business strategy. The phone call with Madeline was the last direct contact I had with anyone from Corvex. But the industry reports continue to track their performance, and the story they told was consistent. Systematic approaches to client relationships were proving less effective than partnership-based methods. Within 18 months of my departure, Corvex had lost nearly 40% of their major accounts. Their revenue had declined by 35%. Most telling, they had been forced to hire 3 new client relationship managers to replace the single position I had held. But those new hires were implementing systematic approaches rather than relationship-based methods. They were following the same processes that had failed to retain clients when I was there. Meanwhile, Our division at Halden had grown to 22 people, all focused on relationship-based client management. We had become the fastest-growing division in the company's history, with client satisfaction scores consistently above 95% and retention rates that exceeded industry standards. The approach I had tried to implement at Corvex, treating clients as strategic partners rather than account numbers, had become the foundation of a thriving business that proved relationship-based methods weren't just more humane, but more profitable. I was reviewing quarterly performance metrics when James Harrison knocked on my office door. "Sophie, do you have a minute? I want to show you something." He handed me a printed email from Robert Chen at Meridian Industries. "James, I wanted to thank you and your team for the exceptional service over the past year. Working with Sophie and her team has been a completely different experience from our previous analytics provider. You don't just deliver data, you help us think strategically about our business challenges. This is what partnership should look like." "He's not the only one," James said, handing me a folder of similar emails. This is from the past quarter alone. Client feedback specifically praising the relationship-based approach. I read through the emails, each one describing the same experience, strategic thinking rather than just service delivery, proactive consultation rather than reactive problem-solving, genuine partnership rather than transactional interactions. "Sophie, you've built something remarkable here. This isn't just a successful business division, it's proof that treating clients as strategic partners is more profitable than treating them as account numbers. It's also proof that systematic processes can't replace genuine human connection in business relationships." "What do you mean?" "I mean that efficiency and scalability are important, but they're not the only measures of business success. Sometimes the most profitable approach is the one that prioritizes relationship depth over process efficiency. And sometimes the sweetest victory is watching your former employer discover that lesson through their own mistakes." I looked out my office window at Boston Harbor, thinking about everything that had happened since that confrontation in Conference Room B. Madeline had forced me to choose between her vision of systematic efficiency and my belief that business relationships required genuine human connection. The market had rendered its verdict conclusively. Clients would pay premium prices for strategic partnerships, but they would eventually abandon providers who treated them like account numbers, regardless of how efficiently those services were delivered. But the real satisfaction wasn't in Corvex's struggles or Madeline's belated recognition that relationship-based approaches had business value. It was in the knowledge that treating clients as strategic partners wasn't just more humane, it was more profitable. The systematic processes that Madeline had championed as more efficient and scalable had proven to be less effective at actually retaining clients and generating business growth than the relationship-based methods she had rejected. As I finished reviewing the quarterly metrics, I realized that the story was complete. Not because Corvex had failed, but because the approach I had fought to implement there had succeeded elsewhere. The market had proven that genuine business relationships weren't just feel-good philosophy. They were legitimate strategy that delivered measurable results. They had forced me to choose between their vision of systematic efficiency and my belief in relationship-based approaches. I had chosen relationships, and the market had proven that choice correct. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply letting people experience the consequences of their own decisions. Madeline had chosen process efficiency over relationship effectiveness. The market had shown her which approach actually worked. I didn't need to gloat or seek additional vindication. The quarterly performance metrics sitting on my desk told the story clearly enough. Treating clients as strategic partners rather than account numbers wasn't just more humane, it was more profitable. The systematic processes she had championed as more efficient and scalable had proven to be less effective at the only metrics that actually mattered: client satisfaction, retention, and business growth. That was validation enough.